So, good day, all of you. So today we get to begin some of the seminars or the first seminar for the class. And throughout the semester, we are going to see different plant families that are going to have several representatives or we'll see several representatives from this family as the semester progresses. And so today we have a plant family that you'll see, for example, in a Hawaiian airline logo. So we have a person here with a flower on their head or ear. And so that's going to be the flower or the typical flower that is going to be representative of this family. And everybody knows it because it's always associated with Hawaii. But before we get started, we can look at the family tree for this group of plants. And so, as the new work with genetics has now become very popular, they're finding the different lineages, they're finding the different plants that are closely related to one another. And so, this would be the group of plants that are related to the Malvaceae or the Mallow hibiscus family that we'll see as part of the class. And so when we look at it, we have a few other genera that you may find or come across here and there, not as popular as some of the more common ornamentals that we're going to deal with, but every so often you may find a few individuals in the collector's items or some nurseries that may sell things that are a little bit more unusual. So we have the Thymeliaceae, and that is going to be characterized by our days. That would be the genus. So here is the individual or the flowers that would be the representative for this family. And so that goes away. And then we have the Cistaceae, which is uh, the rock rose family, and that is going to be represented by the rock rose that we'll see later on as the semester progresses. So that is going to be a very common ornamental. And notice there's going to be some five petals, a lot of stamens, and one stigma associated with this flower. And then we're going to have the Gruioides, now part of the Malvaceae. So in the old days, this was its own family, but now through the genetic work, it has been lumped with the hibiscus or the mallows, and that's going to be here represented by Gruia occidentalis, which we will see this one later on in the semester. And notice there's going to be many similarity with the flowers. They may look similar. Maybe this one is a little bit smaller because it's a different species, but because they all came from one common ancestor several years ago or million years ago. And as they branched and diversified, then they became their own individuals. And so that's where all of the members from the Malvaceae originate from one ancestor, one common ancestor. And you can see where they have determined that the lineage may have been separated, giving rise to some of these other subfamilies, or where they separated from their other closely related members in the same group of plants. So Gruioides, that's now a subfamily, and that's going to be Gruia. Or we have Bittierioides, which is going to be represented by this plant from South Africa. Hermania would be the genus for this individual. And then we have Sterculioides in the old days. This was a family, and this is the chocolate family, here represented by Brachychiton or the bottle tree that is often come planted throughout. Or it's going to be Teleoides, the genus Telea, which is going to be mainly trees by the common name of linden tree. And here you can see many stamens, five petals, and that's going to be the typical family. Or Dombeioides, after the genus Dombeia, and that is going to be the hydrangea tree or the peekaboo tree from Madagascar would be our representative. And Bronioides, that is going to be kind of obscure. We have Hectorioides, that's also obscure. So you're probably not going to encounter them. And then if we look at the more common individuals, we have Malvaceae, which is the mallow, and that is going to be represented by the common hibiscus, which we'll see many hybrids and many representatives here. And then we have the Bombacoides, or the bombax, that would be the baobab tree, or in this case, we have our ceiba, the silk floss tree, which the stamens are now going to be in some kind of column or a little bit different, but generally the flower would be relatively the same or very similar. So that kind of runs through the many members of this family groups and or this mallow-like, hibiscus-like members that have are really closely related to one another. And that goes away. And so now if we just focus on the Malvaceae, just the mallow or hibiscus family, we see a very large distribution. So there's going to be many tropical, there's going to be many that are going to be somewhat desert-like. And so it's distributed throughout the world, except for some either very dry or extreme cold areas. Then there's going to be some halt in some of them. But we see here in America, we do have them from Central Mexico all the way to South America. It is a dicot, which means that it is a broad leaf shrub. So it will have herbaceous, it will have woody shrubs, it will even have some trees. 243 genera, more or less. We'll see the more common ones that you will encounter, and about 4,000 plus species. This is a kind of small family if we were to compare to some of the bigger ones that may have over 20,000 species. So this is a small one that we can deal with. And then what is important is for you to begin to understand the flowers. So if you have not done so, please be familiar with the flower. Please learn all the different flower parts, because what we have here is just a generic drawing that you may find in your high school biology textbook or in any of the botany or generic science textbook. And so it's the reproductive structure of the flower of the plant, which is a flower. And so when we look at a flower, we're going to find those important components. So for example, there's going to be a receptacle that's going to give rise to the flower parts. There's going to be sepals that are going to be modified leaves that will have a very important job of protecting the flower when it's in the bud stage. Later on, depending on what flower it is, those may play some kind of role in attracting pollinators. And then above that, we have the petals that are usually going to be kind of colorful. They can also play a role in attracting pollinators, or they can also serve as a landing platform for those pollinators. And then when we look at the actual reproductive structures, we have the carpel, in this case, sometimes called pistil. And that is going to be made up of the stigma, which role or job is to take the pollen. That is going to be connected to a style that will eventually lead to the ovary, which will have the ovules that will become the seed later on. The ovary will become the fruit. And so collectively, the stigma, the style, and the ovary is going to be known as a carpel, and it's going to be considered the gynecium, or for lack of better description, the female components of a flower or the plant. And then on the other side, we have another structure. It's known as a stamen, and that is going to be made of an anther with a filament. The anther is going to have a main role of producing pollen, and the filament is going to hold the anther in place, or is going to allow it to come up or be up and display and make sure that it comes in contact with the pollinator. And so collectively, this is known as the stamen, It is also known as the andrecium, or for lack of better description, it is the male component or the male part of the flower. And so this is going to pretty much be the makeup of many or most of the flowers. Some of them are going to have unique items that evolve just in their own lineage. But what's important is that we can take this generic flower, and plants are going to change it. So when we look at a hibiscus flower, which is going to be the representative for this group, we see that it's not exactly the same as the previous image. So for example, here is where the flower is in a bud stage, and we can see the sepals. I mentioned before the sepals are going to be green in this case, and they form a capsule, kind of a protective device. The bud is still growing, and so the sepals are protecting the bud from any damage. The flower is going to be something very sensitive. And then here, I did not mention before, but there's also bracts. Bracts could also protect the bud when it's in an even smaller stage. And later on, in with a few plants, specific plants, the bracts are going to be the showy part of the flower. So we do have some bracts here associated uh, with the flower. So we have the sepals, and then we have the bractlets, or the bracts, as they are also known. And then as the flower continues to mature, now we can see the emergence of the petals. Now they're going to be much more colorful, and those will open up to reveal the reproductive structure. So with the hibiscus, we're going to have something that is known as a column. So the reproductive parts of the plants are going to be held above by a column or a structure that's going to be in the middle of the flowers. And so at the tips, we see several different stigmas that are fused with this column. And then we also have all the stamens that are also fused with the column. So at some point, it was more practical, or through a selection by a specific pollinator, this gave the advantage to this plant, and so then evolved into the hibiscus and the structure that a lot of these members of the members of this family are going to keep or inherit it. And so when we look at some of the selections, so the normal hibiscus is going to have 5 petals, a lot of stamens, and the stigmas. But then through the process of selection and possibly natural mutation and selection and the human involvement, we may find hibiscus that are multi-petals. And so what happens is that the stamens, as well as the stigma, and almost every single part of the uh, flower is going to be a modified leaf, or at least its origin back in the ancestor was a modified leaf that then became modified and colorful for attracting pollinator. You got a different job. And so it is not uncommon for, through mutations, for them to revert to some kind of petal-like or leaf-like, as we can see here. So we see now a deformation of the column because some of the fusion is gone, because now some of those stamens are made into petals. And if we see here, it's another example of a multi petal hibiscus. And here's a little bit more complex now. So the column is almost gone, and we just have an assortment of different petals. And there's always going to be the in between. So we have some petals that have some kind of stamen still attached to them, probably no longer functional, so it's no longer able to produce pollen. And we even have some stigmas attached to them, probably no longer functional. So in most cases, this will be now a sterile selection of some of these plants. And here's where we have another selection where all the stamens, you have no stamens, or the stigmas here, are completely turned into a petal-like, and now the column is just kind of on its side. So you don't no longer have that nice column. And so when we look at just a normal traditional hibiscus that is not the multi-petal, then we see the column here, and then we have the reproductive structure. I mentioned the stigmas that are going to have a style. The style is going to be hidden inside the column. So I had to cut the column throughout so that I will be able to extract the style. That is going to be connected to the ovary exactly like we saw with that diagram. We see the bracts and we see the sepals here. The petals are now gone. And then we see the stamens still fused to the column right there. And then that will eventually get pollinated, get fertilized, and a fruit is going to be produced out of the flower. The ovary is going to mature. The ovary is going to turn into the fruit, and all of the ovules will eventually become individual seeds. For hibiscus or many members of this mallow, the fruit is going to be a capsule. It's going to be dry most often when it matures. It's going to split and then it's going to release the seeds that will fall to the ground and they will then germinate the following season. And so here is the capsule open and you see the seeds that remain because they haven't been blown by the wind. And so here is a few other examples of different fruits. On the left, we have the monkey hand or devil's hand. We'll see that later on. And on the right, we have the common cheese wheat because the seeds will eventually split and they'll drop off. So this is just a little bit smaller and not a closed capsule, but it still has a different uh, seeds right there. What is also unique to this plant is that almost all of the members are going to have stellate or star-shaped hairs. So when you touch them, they may feel quite rough, and or if some of these hairs happen to go on the back of your neck, you may be itching or itchy for a while. So when you feel the leaves, they're going to be a little bit rough. When you feel the stem, they're going to be a little bit rough. And if we were to look here, we have those hairs inside the seed pod of a brachychiton or those bottle trees. And if we were to look through a microscope, here are the hairs. So the hairs on plants are known as trichome, and that's going to be the plant hair. And so having star-like or stellate hairs, trichomes, is a characteristic unique to this group of plants or the Malvaceae because perhaps their ancestor had this and it protected the plant probably from being eaten and gave other protections to the plant that it was a very important feature that it helped all of the ancestors and they all have kept it. And so stellated hair is going to be unique or at least very predominant among members of this family. And even a closer look or a different view, here you have those trichomes that have a shape of a star. And they could be quite irritating for people who might be sensitive to plants. And so if we look at now the subfamily, this just helps to separate one big family. So there's going to be other plants that are going to be closely related. Grewia, what used to be its own family, now lumped together. So we have Grewia accidentalis as our type specimen here. And so when we cut this plant, the flower, and see the inside, we see probably the beginning of the column. So there is a little bit of an extension here above the receptacle. We also have a nice area where you have the nectary gland. So this is common with many flowers where nectar is going to be a reward for the pollinator. So we have the beginnings of a column that gets a lot more complex with hibiscus. And then we do not have a fusion of the stamens and or the covering of the stigma. We still see all the stamens that are just kind of free, maybe fused at the very bottom with the column, but pretty much they're going to be free. And then one very large stigma, which the style leading to the ovary that is going to be below. And so here's the column, and there's different parts that we see. So there's going to be several ones, few ornamentals, a few edibles. So here's another one, and some of them you might not come across them on your daily walk of the city. Some of them are you might see them in botanic gardens or in other areas where they might have some of these more unusual individuals or somebody who might be collecting plants. But if you see very closely, there are the hairs, the trichomes, all over this plant, stems, flower buds, sepals, and even the leaves. And here's the fruit for these individuals that will eventually dry, and inside is going to be the seeds. And then we have Growia asiatica that has become a little bit more common, so it is no longer a rare thing. It is native to Southeast Asia, and because Long Beach has one of the largest population of Cambodian Khmer, uh, it's now being grown as a fruit tree because it will give a fruit that is going to be edible. The flowers are going to be yellow, and there's a fruit, a kind of soft fleshy fruit that it's eaten in Southeast Asia, and now it's also eaten by the Cambodian community out here in Long Beach. And then there's Sparmania, which is kind of looks like a shooting star. So this one will face down, or the flower will face down. Uh, this one comes from Africa, Sparmania africana, and so it kind of looks like a mini hibiscus, or a few more unusual. This is at the LA County Arboretum, and so we have the genus Luia, and here represented by a tree. And it happens that I was there when it was flowering, and you can see the flowers that resemble some of the other Growillas that we have. Or we have Carcorus, which this is a very old-fashioned food. It goes by the wrongful name of Jewish spinach or Jewish leaf because I guess it is native to Europe. And in the past, in history, the Jewish communities have used the leaves for eating or for cooking. And it's still very popular in a traditional Egyptian dish. So it has a very, very long history of being consumed by people. It is now growing out here. People have started planting it. It is now available to find some seeds and grow it out here yourself. So here's the flowers. It's a part of this Grioides subfamily, and there's the seed pods that will have the seeds later on, and that's when the seeds pods are mature, and they just split open to eject the seeds and carry on, plant them. And here's just the leaf that has a very distinct lobe, very nice and slender. And so when you see it, it is very difficult to miss it, or it's very helpful for IDing the plant when you see this lobes because very few plants have something like that. The next family is the Biternioides, and this is now Hermania from South Africa. So this is going to be a group of extremely drought tolerant plants from Africa. This one from Namibia. You can see the very tiny flowers, but they are in the hibiscus family, so they'll have the same characteristics. Some of them are going to be facing down, as this one, there's bell shape. But once again, you can see the hairs throughout the stem and the leaves. In this case, obviously the hairs are going to act as a sunscreen for the plant, protecting it from the heat, thus allowing it to grow in very dry areas or dry climates. And here's one that is growing here in a garden in Long Beach, probably one of the better ones that I've seen. It's called Million Bells, or one of those million bells that are out there, because those are all flowers that you see there in golden yellow. And here's a close-up of the flowers themselves and the side view of them. And there's the tiny cutesy flower. And then from Australia, we have the genus Wickennotia. So this happens to be whatever ancestor was left in Australia, diversified into an Australian native plant, which is this one. So it's only found in Australia. And so we have the petals that are fused, kind of creating a very nice, uh, a colorful area. And then we have the reproductive structures in the side. So this is Wickennotia. And then a very close genus, also from Australia, is the genus Thomasia. Here, growing at Naples on Naples Island, is Thomasia solanaceae, meaning with the leaves that look like solanum or a potato. And there's the flowers that kind of look like a star in this case. But becoming more popular, I still need to see a lot more. So you might see them every once in a while if you look hard. They're out there. So here's some different views of those. And here's another one that I've grown here. And then a few more obscure members. So this is the genus Rulingia. And the photographs are coming from Santa Cruz Botanic Garden. So Santa Cruz Botanic Garden, sorry, yes, which is part of UC Santa Cruz, has a very nice collection of southwestern Australia. And so if you want interested in Australian plants that would grow very well on our in our Mediterranean climate, then this is the place to see. So here's Rulingia, and for seeing weird, unusual things, this would be the place. So there's the flowers, and then the same capsules that are kind of indicative of the family group. And then Lasupetalum, here, the genus, also from Australia, and also happens to be flowering. Small flowers, but there's the flowers, including the hairs, star-shaped hairs that you see throughout this plant. And there's an even closer look of this flower. And then a different species for this is more of a larger shrub. And there's the flowers for this individual, and the hairs and everything else. And then Guasuma. This one is native to Mexico into Central America. The genus Guasuma, part of this. Now, the flowers are not going to be as exciting. So those are the full flowers right here. But it does have a woody capsule fruit that you can kind of gnawed or scrape some of the outside with your teeth, and it is edible. It is eaten in Mexico, and when I was a lot younger as a child, I used to eat them, and it's nothing fancy, but it's edible. But most important is going to be the chocolate plant. So here's Theobroma and the chocolate plants that are being grown in Ecuador. So chocolate does have a very long history with human. Obviously, it is was referred to as the food of the god or the drink of the gods, and that's why they became very popular. It was only the royalty who would eat it, and now it's available to everybody. So there's the chocolate trees. Here's the beginning of the flowers, or sorry, the flowers in the beginning of the seed pod for chocolate. So that's the chocolate flower. And here's the beginning. The chocolate flower or the chocolate plant has something that is known as cauliflory, which means that the flowers are going to be produced from the old stem or from the main stem. They have to because the chocolate pod is going to be big. If it was produced at the tips, you'll probably bend the branches and maybe break them. And so often when plants have a very large fruit where they need more support, they may opt for producing the flowers out of the stem. And so that's what's happening here. We have the main stem for the chocolate plant, and you see where the flower and the seed pod or the chocolate pod is now coming out from. And here's a chocolate pods, chocolate fruit as is ripening and is ready to be harvested. And in one of my earliest trips in Brazil, we came across some wild chocolate plant, and it was one of my first trips, so I have never seen it in the wild. And so you're in Brazil, you have a camera, it's important for you to climb it, even though you're risking your life, not really. But you have to record yourself harvesting some of the wild chocolate that you may still find in certain areas. Whether it's wild or still cultivated, there's a lot of different wild chocolate out there, including the ones that are cultivated that are now selected for having more butter or more of that fatty chocolate content. And so there I am harvesting chocolate in the wild in Brazil. And so the chocolate pod looks like that on my Hanford scale. Originally, it was probably not eaten for the seeds. The seeds are really bitter. Chocolate itself, when it's raw or the raw cacao beans, it's a really bitter, nasty tasting fruit. So it is most likely that when the people started to or discovered chocolate growing in the wild, they would harvest the fruit for the meaty outer covering. It is a slightly sweet. There's not a lot of it, but most likely people ate the pulp and then they probably sow the seeds or throw them away until they figured out that they could process them into some kind of drink. Again, we don't know for sure how they started to make it into a drink or how they toasted the beans, but most likely, like many other fruits, it was not directly the seed that they were eating or started eating. It was the pulp, and later on found the use for the seeds. So that's a newly opened pot with the pulp, and then we have the seeds, which no longer has the pulp, and so that's how they look. Which those get then roasted, and then depending on the process, then you get a couple of different products. So here are some raw, not raw, but roasted, toasted chocolate beans. They are available at your local fufu supermarket, so it's nothing unusual. You can find them in bags, usually ranging from like $10 to $15 for this tiny bag. And or you have the little nibs when they break them into pieces, and it is being sold as a health food, which is tastes horrible. It's really nasty tasting and really bitter, and not a good snack. Or they have extracted the cacao butter, and that's very important to for you to know, is that the chocolate, as you know it, is not an American product. Yes, the plant was in America, or originates in America. Yes, in the old people from Mexico used to make a drink that they offered to the gods. But it was when the plant and the beans was taken into Europe that Europeans extracted the butter and made chocolate the way we eat it today. It was also the Europeans who added sugar and cinnamon to make the chocolate that we know today. So that it had to go through that trip to have the chocolate that is modern days. But you also have the cacao butter. And so whenever you see white chocolate, they can call it white chocolate because although it's not really chocolate, it does include the cacao butter to make it a chocolate product. And there's cacao powder for making your hot cocoa. Or there's the other chocolate products that you will see out there that you can purchase if you happen to be a big chocolate fan. And or there's going to be aisles of chocolate out there, some a little more expensive than others. So that is a European product, or at least a product from the Americas with European influence, and different kinds of chocolate drinks. And then here we have a very nice advertisement from Coffee Bean. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but it has Maya chocolate mocha, and it's made with Dutch cocoa. Well, I just also disagree that if you take chocolate and add some chili powder, now we can call it a Maya Mexican product, because traditionally when the old Mexicans, indigenous Mexicans, were eating chocolate, they were eating it with chili powder. They were eating it they would probably put chili powder and vanilla to kind of take away the bitterness or the nasty taste of it because it would have been horrible. And so chili powder and chocolate, well, you need a lot more to really make it more into a Mexican. And so when we look at more of the traditional Mexican preparation, so they would have a metate or this grinding stone. That's where they would take the beans. Hopefully they were roasted. I don't know. And they would grind them up to create the powder. To that, they would add some corn to kind of thicken it. So they would add some corn. They would also add vanilla. So vanilla is also native to Mexico and to Central and South America. So vanilla was already known. Is it the same way we eat it now? Probably not, but they could take the beans and add some vanilla flavoring to the drink. Then they'll take some chili powder to spice it up, take away probably some of the bitterness. They would then color it with achiote or bixia, so that gives it a color. This achiote is still used in a lot of traditional Mexican cooking. And then they'll broth it or make the foam by mixing it or changing it into different containers, and that's how they will drink it. They will probably drink it in a traditional tecomate, which is a bowl made from the Mexican cannonball tree. So they call it tecomate in the Mexican word. So that would be the bowl or how they would be traditionally drank. Uh, and so here's a different view of that uh, ice chocolate. And then we have, I mentioned there's other cacao species. So here is a different one that I happened to see when I was in Ecuador. And so here's some of the lesser known or less cultivated, less selected chocolate fruits. And you can probably still get some kind of flavoring. Or this one here as well that has the cauliflower in some of the beginnings. And then we have the subfamily Sterculoides. So chocolate is the most important for the previous one. Sterculoides, which was also a subfamily later on with the genus Sterculia. So here's a very common tree planted in Cuba throughout the streets. And so here is the flowers for that. And so there's a close-up of them. And the top showing you once again the star-shaped hairs found throughout the family. And there's the inside with the single stigma and the petals that are fused. And there's me holding the flower. And there's again a different view of the hairs that are shaped like a star. And those will have a fruit that is going to be the dry capsule that will open and release the seeds. And so here's where I've happened to find the seeds. The inside of the seed pods will have a lot of those hairs as well, which you need to be very careful if you're going to handle them. And those will probably protect the seeds, and then they're just going to go away. And there's the close-up of those hairs. And some of them can be eaten. So here's where you go to some of the stores, they do sell these seeds that you can put them in water. They begin to swell, and it makes a gelatinous type material that you can use it for desserts or flavor it and eat it as a dessert. And here's the seed pods, and there's where I was mixing them with water just to show you. And then in the same family, we have the more common genus Brachychiton, which is the bottle tree. It's from Australia, and there are several species throughout Southern California that are planted as ornamental trees. So here's this very similar seed pod, very woody. And then here's Brachychiton bewildy, growing at South Coast Botanic Garden. And here's showing you probably some of the nicer, much more ornate flowers that from the ones that are grown out here in Southern California. Or the red flame tree, Brachychiton acerifolius, most likely a hybrid. There are three very happy trees in growing in Bixby Park. and they're still there. And I think it's a hybrid because the flowers are not scarlet red like the species, and I have yet to find a fruit. So I don't know the history of when or who planted them, but there's some kind of weird hybrid here growing in Long Beach. Or this one is from southwestern Australia, different brachychiton. Here's a flower, and there's a side view of that one. And then brachychiton rupestris in the bottle tree, because this one is showing you the very swollen stem that kind of gives it a bottle shape. And there you can see it better. So this one growing at San Luis Obispo, their horticulture unit, and there's a flower not as ornate as the other members of this family. And closely related here, growing at Fullerton Arboretum, is the genus Firmania, Firmania simplex. I think it's parasol tree as a common name. Flowers also not as ornate, so just the petals. And then the very large column here with the stigma on top. And then those will change color. Some of the other ones turning reddish. And there's a very nice side view of the flowers and even the fruit. We have it here, at least the beginnings. But in this one, the more common one is going to be the genus Cola. Now, if it sounds familiar, this is a ingredient for Coca-Cola. So we know the first ingredient, coca, was erythroxylum, which was the cocaine plant. And then the cola comes from this, the fruit from this plant from Africa. So it's they take some of the caffeine and uh, probably some syrup from the seeds of this plant. So it is a product from the fruit. I have yet to see it outside. So here we have the plant growing at the Huntington Library in their conservatory. So it's a little bit tender. So I don't think, I'm not sure if it's able to survive the winters outdoor here in Southern California. But Cola acuminata from Coca-Cola, it's another very important tree because it does have some good economical value. And pirated pictures from Google obviously has the flowers, how if they were to be close, and then the seed pods with the seeds where they take the ingredient for making Coca-Cola, which is going to be a very important product, and everybody drinks Coca-Cola. And then in the genus, subgenus, subfamily Teleoides, the linden tree, here's some of the better ones that I've seen. This is El Monte or El Monte. The trees are native to Eastern US or Europe, and they like more cold climate. And so in my first discoveries of many of them, they were not very happy, except for the ones that we found in El Monte. We have some very happy trees, and they're not very common to see around. So very distinct. If they're flowering, there's going to be a very large bracts associated with the flower cluster or the group of flowers. And that is a dead giveaway that you are dealing with a linden tree. And so here's a close-up of the flowers for those. And so we have American and or hardleaf linden tree. And so here's the flowers and many petals, sorry, 5 petals, and then many stamens, and then just one stigma with an over in the center. And then that bract that is going to be leaf-like, that is going to be very showy and a very distinct characteristics for linden trees. And the close-up of the flowers and the buds and everything else. So here's a linden americana, the American linden tree. So there was about 2 trees growing in a Monte, and there was a harsh leaf linden also in the year in the vicinity. So there was the 2 ones or the 2 main ones, the best ones that I've seen in Southern California. And then the subfamily Dombeioides, Dombeia, primarily from Madagascar. So whatever ancestor happened to remain in Madagascar evolved into the different Dombeyas that we have there. So here's one of the bigger Dombeia Weleki that we planted in Griffith Park by Dodger Stadium. And here's the very nice and ornate flowers or the cluster of flowers. Here's one of the oldest trees that is here in Long Beach. It has been severely pruned. I think it was just leaning too much, and or maybe they were got tired with it, or maybe it just broke. It's still alive, but it's no longer look or it has this big size. Probably planted when the house was built, and I think it's one of those historic houses. And there's the big cluster of pink flowers, and some of them are going to have white flowers. So here's one of the white clouds type. So another Dombeya with white flowers. And here's some of the fruits for this Dombeya. So the same capsule that you see with your Growia or very similar because again, they're related to one another. And then we have the genus Trocheopsis erythrosaloides. So this is very unusual. It's from just a few islands, I think in somewhere in Asia or Europe. But the photograph I took from Kew Botanic Garden that has a very nice collection of weird things from all over the world. So in one of my last visit, this was flowering, and obviously I've never seen it, but it's quite a nice plant. And I don't think it's in cultivation in the United States or cultivation in or offering the Gato Garden Center. So it's just more mainly a botanic garden. And then I don't have a photograph, so this is also pirated. The genus Durio or the durian. This is a different subfamily, the Helicteroides, and it is very tropical, so I have yet to see it out here. Probably doesn't grow, or it wouldn't do as well. So here's just the flowers from Google. However, it is has a very distinct fruit. So this is one of the largest. It is considered the uh, king of all fruits because you either like them or you hate them. This is the fruit that has a reputation for having a very strong fragrance, so much so that many people find it extremely difficult to breathe, or people were at one point they were not allowed to eat it before getting on a plane because it will still smell, or people will still have can still have a stench associated with it. It's been described as a locker room full of old used socks. Some people refer to it as methane like. Some people like the fruit, some people hate it. I personally like it. So, your choice if you never had it. There I am for scale holding a fruit. And so you can buy it. It's going to be a dry capsule. Inside, there's going to be seeds that are going to be covered by a very soft custard like pulp. And so it is that pulp that you would eat. The seeds you will plant if you want to. If it's fresh, they will germinate, or you can just chuck it. But there's the pulp for that. And then if we just move to the last subfamily, which is the Malvoides, this is going to be the mallow, the main one that we're going to focus on. The subgroup Kirii, very obscure, so we will not even mention that. So we're going to concentrate on the Malvi, go CP, and high BC would be our groups for this subfamily. So we're going to further divide it into other smaller groups because it's going to be easier to understand or separate. So they're all part of the subfamily Malvoidae, but divided into subgroups. And so Malvi would be the first one. This is going to be represented by the genus Malva. And here is what they refer to as uh, Italian hollyhocks, sometimes referred to as Malva sylvestris. So very nice, very ornate. Or the genus Malva here represented by cheeseweed. Cheeseweed it was another plant that was very popular in the old days. There are several Greek dishes that will have it, so the leaves can be cooked and can be eaten. And Unfortunately, now it grows everywhere, mainly as an unwanted plant. But its history does tell us that it was a very important food for people in the early days, especially around the Mediterranean and especially in Greece. So we have those very small flowers right there, and those will then be followed by the cheese with fruit. That is also edible when the seeds are green. You can eat them, add it to salads, and voila, you have something different. Or the genus Abutilon. There are California native Abutilon as well as Central and South American. So Chinese lantern would be a common name. So now the petals are kind of together creating a tube because in South America or where the native to, their main pollinator would be a hummingbird. And so that's why it's gonna have that form. And inside you have a column now. So within this subfamily, a very well developed column is gonna be present or is gonna be the norm. And then we have all of the stamens at the tip with the stigma. And so here's some more photographs of other uh, selections of those uh, butylenins. And here's one where you see all the stigmas just kind of together. And so this is a butylene palmary. So this is the native one to California. It's becoming really popular because people are planting more natives. And so you might see it here and there. Here's growing wild in Griffith Park. Not really native to that area, but somebody planted and now it's there to stay. And there's the flowers for those, as well as genus Alsia, which is going to be the common hollyhocks here with some of the pinks and the red ones, and or the genus Anoda, which is another one that has a very long history of being eaten as an herb or in stews by the people from Central and South America, and even some parts of Mexico will eat it. And so here it is at the market, and there's the flowers for this one. So it's a tiny mallow. And then Anisodontia, which is the pink hibiscus-like. So here's the flowers for that, as well as Caliroa, which is another native, and or Lavaterra, which here is Lavaterra argentiflora, the native mallow. There's a few that are going to be indigenous to the Catalina Islands or the different Channel Islands. This is the native to California. This is Lavaterra maritima, which is native to Europe. And this is native to the Channel Island. This is the Catalina native Lavaterra. So they change a little. They may be more ornate. And as you hop from different Channel Islands, they will have their own unique Lavaterra. But in our coastal sage scrub and chaparral area, a predominant or a very popular plant is going to be the genus Malacothamnes. Chaparral mallow would be a common name. So here's a very large shrub growing at Griffith Park. And here's just the mallow hibiscus-like flowers with the stigmas and the stamens. Or Phimosia, which is another one native to California. And there's the flowers. Or if you happen to be heading towards the desert, it is very common to see desert mallow, Spiraea ambigua, just along the road. So very popular. It is a dominant plant in that community. So this are also becoming very popular. Or more unusual, if you happen to find it, this is Robinsonella, and this is a tree from Costa Rica, but it has more of a bluish purple color flower. And so this is from the Forest Arboretum where they have a happy or a very nice specimen. So Robinsonella here to show you some of the beautiful flowers. Or most important would be Gaussipium, which is the genus for cotton. So cotton will fall into this subfamily or family. And so here's a flower that looks like a hibiscus. And then it is the seed pod. Here's when it's young, that inside the seed pod, there's going to be a lot of fiber. that is going to protect the seeds. And so it is this fiber that we know was very valuable to the early Americans or the early colonists, so much so that uh, they went to Africa and kidnapped some of the natives and put them into slavery so that they can work in removing the cotton fibers from the seeds, which is a lot of work. And then later on in history, the cotton gin was developed, and that was the machine that was able to do a lot of this work. But still, the cotton picking, a lot of the early work was done by the slaves that were taken from Africa and then brought over from there into America. And so, in the history of America, the cotton plays a vital or a major role in the history of America. And so here's the seed pods or the seeds being covered with the fiber. And so there's the seeds and the fiber. The seeds are edible or they get planted. And we have 101 ways of using cotton. So we have cotton pads, that's going to be important. We have cotton balls, that is going to be important. We have cotton swabs that are going to be important. Here's a different one. And then we have some sterile cotton gauze. That's important for wounds. And as well as clothing. So most of the clothing would be made out of cotton. Yes, we have some synthetic products now, but for many people, cotton is still a very good product, as well as cotton meal, the seeds ground up and made into an organic fertilizer. And then the genus Hibiscus, here just a few individuals just representing this genus in the different colors that you may see here and there throughout the city. And here's some of the more newer varieties that are out there or hybrids that are very beautiful and very large. Here's one of an old fashioned that has some kind of petal like at the tip of the column. And here's Hibiscus schizopetalum from, I think it's from Japan. This is an old fashioned species. And here's a different one, and this one has more hairs. And this one's from Fullerton. And here's the Hawaiian hibiscus. So yes, although hibiscus are, there is a species native to Hawaii. The ones that was has been used for the Hawaiian Airlines or the ones that people think are from Hawaii are actually from China. But they are the bigger ones, the more ornate. The one here, which is the Hawaiian, is not really big and not really that showy. And then here's a species, Hibiscus coccineum, which means scarlet red. And so here is just very simple, very large, but very beautiful, ornate flower. And this is not as common as the Chinese one, because as you can see, the petals are not as big. And so there's a side view of that. Hibiscus splendens. This one is a drought tolerant hibiscus from Australia that I happen to grow here at some point, and I was able to take a photograph of this. And here's a different one from a botanic garden. So here's a different hibiscus right there, showing you the beautiful flowers. And then Hibiscus saderifa. And this is a species that is native to Africa. Hibiscus saderifa, here's the flowers, is going to be known for something very important. It is going to be the bracts. So here we have the bracts that are going to be kind of succulent. The remnants of the petal here, so they're no longer functional. So it is the bracts that are going to give what is known as Jamaica, which is that red drink that is eaten in Latin America. So by themselves, they are kind of citrusy, and you can eat them when they're raw or fresh like this. So it is the bracts that eventually goes through a process of drying out, where then they are processed into the drink. for all of the different fruit punches out there, or the more common Mexican drink known as Jamaica. But Jamaica or Hibiscus altorifa has its origin in Africa, but now it's associated with Latin America. So just be aware of that. So there's a dry bract, which still has all of those great antioxidants, and it's good for you to drink. And then while I was working with the Department of Recreation and Park for City of Los Angeles, they were growing in Elysian Park a hibiscus elatum in the old days, and then it became talipariti, which is known as Cuban bast. So this is going to be a very large hibiscus-like, and it was very unusual to see. There are not that many planted here in Southern California. Has a very large leaf, and so it was great to see it. And then as you venture into Central Mexico, into Central America, they plant Talepariti or Hibiscus stillaceous, which is a yellow form. And here in Tijuana, there's a tree planted, and here's the flowers for this individual. And there's a seed pod, which looks like many other members. And then the genus Abelmoscus, which is another very important African plant. This one has a flower that looks very similar to hibiscus, and it is the green seed pods when they are young and tender that serve as a very good source of food. It has served the people of Africa for many, many, many years. And that is what we called okra. So the okra is nothing more than a green seed pod. You want to harvest it when they're young because otherwise they become very tough and fibrous and you don't want to eat it. So okra is nothing more than a very young, soft capsule for the okra plant, which is a member of the hibiscus family. So it is through a few of the seeds that were in a slave from Africa when they were brought over to America. Eventually, those seeds were planted in New Orleans, and now we have what is known as gumbo, or we have okra that tends to have a lot more popularity in the South or the southern states because that is where it was probably grown and planted by the early people who had some of the seeds, who brought the seeds from Africa. So here's the okra from the stores, and there's just a very young seed pod. And okra spears, so many, many ways that you can eat this fruit. Or the genus Malvaceae, Turkish cap, I believe is a common name. So here is the seed pod for this, or the fruit, which in this case is kind of fleshy. It's edible. It's kind of dry, but if you never had it and you find that it's going to be red, try it. You're not going to die. You're just going to not be impressed. Or the genus Hawithia, here represented by this tiny, tiny, tiny mallow-like or hibiscus-like flowers. Or the genus Pavonia, which is going to be several of them that are going to be very important for butterflies. And so here's Pavonia being used to feed nectar to butterflies in butterfly houses or butterfly areas in Europe. And so here's the bracts, and the petals are kind of small and just creates a tube that allows for the reproductive structure to come out. And here's one that has the cauliflory, so it has those flowers just coming out of the stem. And then from Australia, the genus Aliagone, this is known as blue hibiscus because most often it's going to be a blue flower that you're going to find in some of the nurseries. There's a few white forms out there, as well as a yellow species. But by the most part, it's going to be this blue hibiscus, as is commonly known. That would be very common. Or the subfamily Bombaceae. This is Bombax, here represented by Ceiba, or the silk flush tree would also fall into this category. And these are trees from Argentina, again, South America. That is where most of these are going to have their origin. And here's a tree growing at South Coast Botanic Garden in full flowers. And here's some trees growing in North Long Beach on Atlantic Boulevard. And we have the flowers as well as the fruit. The flowers are going to look somewhat like hibiscus. They still have a column, but now the stamens are kind of not separated. They're kind of all together at the tip. So here's the yellow ceiba. And there you can see the stigma a little bit separated and also the stamens separated. So here's the seed pod. Most people will think it's a very large avocado because during the summer, that's when they're going to see them hanging from trees. And inside, you have a lot of cotton like material and a lot of seeds. So, traditionally, the cotton from this plant, although not as good quality as a real cotton plant, has been used to stuff pillows and mattresses in Central and South America. And so, the cotton fibers or a cotton like fiber is going to be also found in other members of this group because again they have a common ancestor, so I'm sure they inherited the ability to make this fiber as a way of protecting the seeds. And so here's when the fruits have already split and left behind the cotton ball loaded with lots of seeds. And then we have the genus Adansonia, which is the baobab. And this is a native tree to South Africa and much nicer specimens out of Madagascar. And so very large tree. And there I am for scale. So you see how big the tree is. So this is was taken in my trip to South Africa. This is in Namibia, and there I am at the base. So they are known for having this very big base or trunk. And this one will have the flowers. Although in my trip to Africa, I did not see the flowers. It was later on a trip to Florida where I happened to photograph this. So in this case, we have a plant which flower has evolved to be pollinated by bats. So it's very large. It kind of has a very big column because there's going to have to be a bat that will be able to kind of grasp the flowers, drink the pollen, and kind of go through all the stamens, get covered with pollen, drink the nectar, grab the pollen, and somehow move to the stigma or deliver the pollen to the stigma. So the flowers will open at night, and they're going to be white or bright so that the bat can see them during the evening or when it's dark. So a bat pollinated member of this family, the baobab, and here's a picture from Florida. And baobab is now the new super fruit. So they take some of these fruits or the seeds. It's kind of citrusy. It's not that good tasting. But I guess if you want to try it, is you can see if it's to your liking. But now we have the superfruit of superfruits, which is being given to the baobab. Uh, and then Lagunaria here at the other campus, commonly known as cow itch or primrose tree. In the buds, here's the flowers, and there's the close up of the flowers. Or Pakira, which is the money tree. The money tree that is very popular in communities or people from Asia, has its origin in South America. But when it was taken to Asia, I guess they associated with money. And so here's some of the larger plants that were grown, that are being grown here outdoors in Long Beach. And every so often they will flower. They will have a nice flower, but most people have never seen it because they just keep it small in a container and not really allow it to get big enough to flower. The flowers are kind of large and quite nice. And then they have the seed pod that's going to look very similar to the other. And there's also cotton associated with them. Fremontodendron is a shrub and sometimes a tree that is native to California. It's a flannel bush would be the common name. And so here is the plant. And here's where I was able to find the Fremantodendron mexicanum at the border of Mexico and the U.S., San Diego, in the Otay borderline. So we went looking for them and find a nice natural population. And so that's one. And then its close sister or relative from South America, Chirantodendron. Here's a tree that I grew from seed, and this one has the sepals, but it's going to be the inside where you have something that resembles a hand. So it has kind of five fingers, and so it is being referred to as either monkey hands or devil's hand. So we have the hands that are going to be the stamens, and the stigma is this very sharp point here. So there's a stigma, the style that leads to the ovary. This is another bat pollinated plant flower in nature. And so here is a different image, and there's the flower with the seed pod. And that's where I got the seeds. And you can see on the back of this flower, the yellow, that is the pollen for this flower. Because of the look of the flowers, it has been associated with gods, and the old Mexican people used to use it in rituals, or it's kind of sacred to some cultures in Mexico. And here is the tree with its leaf. That's very happy. Pseudomombox shaving brush tree, as it's referred to, South Coast Botanic Garden. Here's where I've been growing, and I have this tree. So there's the flowers with lots of stamens, and then the petals right there, the side view, and the fruits associated with cotton material, and there's the seeds. And then the true genus Bombox. Here's a beautiful, the only tree that we know here in Southern California at the LA County Arboretum. I happened to be there when it was flowering. The flowers face up, and so you're never gonna see the beautiful display until you bring it down, and then you see this beautiful bright red flower, pollinated by bats, very leathery, very tough. So I was able to find a branch low enough to lower it down and be able to take a photograph. And so there's the stigma with the stamens and everything else. Beautiful if you get a chance to see it, but very unusual to find, except for the LA County Arboretum has a happy tree. And a few others. So here's, since from Central America, no, sorry, this is Ecuador, growing in cauliflower. So there's the seed pod of this individual. Or we have here the chocolate flower and growing out of the LA County Arboretum. This is from Oaxaca. It's a member of this family. And it is the dry flowers that can be mixed with water or milk. And the dry flowers will give a chocolate flavor to the drink. So not the seed pod, and probably whatever oils came out of the seed were kind of infused in the flowers or produced by the flowers, or the essence of that chocolate is also shared with this member of that is related to cacao. So chocolate flower from Oaxaca, and there's the seed pods. And then the genus Quaribia, just being represented here in Ecuador with the fruit. And some of these are just obscure. You're probably not going to find them here, but I was very happy and almost very lucky to have seen them in some of my travels with the fruit. And this one, I was able to cut it open. And here's another, and I don't know the species. Maybe if I take the time, I can find them. And just here's a little tiny mallow here, and just here's another one that I have no idea, just photographed from the wild, and another baby one. And with our chocolate, which is probably the most famous plant next to cotton and next to some of the other members, we know that this family has been very valuable for people throughout history. So enjoy your sneaker, and thank the Malvaceae, the Hibiscus family, for allowing you to enjoy Halloween and all the different sweets that if you have not eaten, you probably ate them many years ago, and that's thanks to this plant. and many ornamentals that are going to be part of the garden. Here's just an assortment of different hibiscus that I came across in a hotel in San Diego. And here's just that one and another one. And so with that, I will end it. Have a great day.